May 14th, 1945, Camp Hearne, Texas. The heat was a physical weight, pressing down with a scent of dry dust and heated pine resin that felt alien to lungs used to the damp rubble of the Rhineland. Inside the corrugated tin processing center, the air was stagnant, vibrating with the low hum of industrial fans that did nothing to cool the 40 women huddled together. Oberhelferin Elsa von Brandt stood rigid, her gray Wehrmachthelferin uniform stained with weeks of travel, the silver lightning bolt insignia on her sleeve fraying, her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. Before them stood a row of wooden tables. Behind the tables, GIs chewing gum with rhythmic, bovine indifference were setting out empty canvas bags. "All right, listen up," a sergeant barked, his accent thick and drawling, unintelligible to most. He gestured sharply to his own chest, then pointed at the women, then made a stripping motion with his hands. A gasp rippled through the group. Beside Elsa, young Greta whimpered, "They're going to do it here, like the rumors said." Elsa gripped Greta's hand, her knuckles white. She looked at the American soldiers, well-fed, relaxed, seemingly bored by the prospect of their humiliation. This was the end of dignity. "Prepare yourselves," Elsa whispered in German, her voice trembling but commanding. "Don't let them see you cry." 3 weeks earlier, Port of Boston. The world was a blur of green and brown, rushing past the wooden slats of the boxcar at a speed that felt reckless. For 3 days, the train had hammered south, a rhythmic, metallic heartbeat that vibrated in Elsa von Brandt's teeth. Clack, 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 clack. Inside the modified Pullman troop sleeper, the air was stale, smelling of unwashed wool, coal smoke, and the sharp, acidic tang of anxiety. 20 women sat on the triple-tiered bunks, swaying in unison with the train's lurching motion. They were Wehrmachthelferinnen, auxiliaries of the Greater German Reich. But here, stripped of their switchboards and radios, they looked more like frightened schoolgirls in ill-fitting gray uniforms. Elsa sat on the bottom bunk, her posture rigid. As an Oberhelferin, it was her duty to maintain order, even here, in the belly of the beast. "Where are we now?" Greta whispered from the middle bunk. Her voice was thin, brittle. Elsa didn't answer immediately. She pressed her eye to a gap in the ventilation slat. Outside, the landscape had shifted. The dense forests of the East Coast were gone, replaced by vast, flat plains that stretched into infinity under a cruel blue sky. There were no bomb craters, no blackened skeletons of buildings, just endless fields of corn and wheat, punctuated by silos that gleamed like cathedrals. "America," Elsa said, her voice low, "the breadbasket." The sheer scale of it made her stomach turn. Goebbels had called them a mongrel nation, a house of cards ready to collapse. But looking at the endless telephone lines dipping and rising alongside the tracks, lines thick with copper, unbroken and functioning, Elsa felt a cold dread settle in her gut. They have so much, she thought. They haven't lost a single brick. She looked down at the box of K-ration biscuits in her hand. Even their prisoner food was wrapped in wax paper and cellophane, sealed with a level of industrial precision that Germany couldn't spare for its frontline troops anymore. "Are they going to kill us, Elsa?" Greta asked again. "Like the Russians?" "No," Elsa lied, though her own heart raced. "We are valuable for exchange. They need us to trade for their own pilots." The train whistle blew, a lonely, mournful shriek that cut through the noise of the wheels. The brakes engaged with a screech of grinding steel, throwing the women forward. The train was slowing down. The heat rising from the floorboards intensified, no longer just warm, but stifling. Elsa stood up, straightening her tunic. She checked the silver lightning bolt insignia on her sleeve, a reflex of pride. "Get your bags," she commanded, masking her fear with the bark of authority. "We are here." The heavy sliding door of the troop sleeper groaned open, and the world turned white. Elsa shielded her eyes, blinded by a sunlight so fierce it felt like a physical blow. The air that rushed in wasn't just hot. It was a solid wall of dry, dusty heat that instantly sucked the moisture from her throat. It smelled of baked earth, engine oil, and something sweet, like heated pine resin. "Aussteigen! Raus!" a voice shouted, not in German, but in a lazy, drawling approximation of it. Elsa stepped down onto the gravel, her boots crunching loudly in the sudden silence of the stopped train. The heat wrapped around her gray wool uniform like a suffocating blanket. Sweat pricked her scalp under her cap almost instantly. They had arrived at a siding in the middle of nowhere. A high wire fence, strung with barbed wire, stretched out into the shimmering distance. Behind it lay rows of identical wooden barracks, raised on concrete blocks. "Move it along, ladies," a military policeman said, gesturing with a baton. He wasn't pointing a rifle. In fact, his M1 carbine was slung casually over his shoulder, barrel pointing at the dirt. He was chewing something, gum, with a rhythmic, bovine indifference that Elsa found unsettling. Where are the dogs? She wondered. Where are the whips? As the women huddled together on the platform, a truck rumbled past inside the fence. In the back sat men, German men. They were tanned, laughing, passing a cigarette between them. Elsa froze. On the back of their blue denim work shirts, 2 massive white letters were stenciled, PW. They looked healthy. One of them, a blond boy who couldn't have been older than 20, waved at the women. He didn't look like the skeletal figures Elsa had seen returning from the Eastern Front. He looked like a farmer on a lunch break. "They are fattening them up," Greta whispered, clinging to Elsa's arm. "Like livestock." Elsa nodded sharply, clutching her kit bag. It was the only logical explanation. The Americans were pragmatic gangsters. They wouldn't waste food unless they wanted something in return. "Attention!" An officer with a silver bar on his collar stepped onto a crate. He looked down at the group of women with an expression of mild annoyance, wiping sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. "Men to the north compound," he announced, his voice amplified by the flat terrain. He pointed a thumb toward a separate block. "Women, you go to Sector C. Processing starts immediately." The casual wave of his hand terrified Elsa more than a scream would have. It was the gesture of a man sorting mail, not human beings. "Stay close," Elsa hissed to her unit. "Do not volunteer for anything." The inside of the administration building sounded like a machine gun nest. Clack, clack, ding, zip, clack, clack, ding. Dozens of typewriters were firing at once. The air smelled of stale tobacco smoke and mimeograph ink. Elsa was shoved gently but firmly forward in a line that moved with the relentless efficiency of a Ford assembly line. "Name?" a corporal asked without looking up. He sat behind a folding table, fingers hovering over a Remington typewriter. "Von Brandt Elsa," she stated, her chin high. "Oberhelferin. Serial number 66482. Rank?" The corporal sighed, finally looking at her. He had the glazed eyes of a man who had done this 1,000 times. "Oberhelferin," she repeated. "It is equivalent to senior assistant." "German auxiliary," he muttered, typing rapidly. Clack, clack, clack. "Next." Elsa blinked. "That is all? Under the Geneva Convention, I must—" "Lady, I don't care about your convention. I just need to fill this box," he interrupted, pointing a pen at a station further down. "Fingerprints. Move." She stumbled to the next table. A heavy-set man grabbed her hand. His grip was loose, impersonal. He pressed her thumb into a pad of cold, black ink, then rolled it onto a white card. One by one. 10 fingers. Elsa stared at her hands. They were stained black, marked like a criminal's. Back in Berlin, she had been a respected specialist in the Nachrichtenhelferinnen Corps. Here, she was just paperwork. A logistical burden to be categorized, tagged, and filed. "Here's your ISN," the man said, handing her a card with a long string of numbers stamped on it. 8WG 12948. "Don't lose it. You want to eat, you show this. You want mail, you show this." She took the card. It felt flimsy. There was no interrogation, no bright lights, no demands for code ciphers or troop movements. It was insulting in its own way. They didn't need her information. They were so confident in their victory that her secrets were worthless to them. "Move along. Waiting area B." Elsa wiped her inky fingers on her skirt, ruining the gray wool, but she didn't care. She joined Greta and the others in a corralled corner of the room. The Americans moved around them with clipboards and coffee mugs, laughing about a baseball game. "They are too calm," Elsa whispered to herself, watching a sergeant laugh as he filed a stack of papers. "They are saving the worst for tonight." The barracks, labeled Structure C4, was essentially a long wooden box wrapped in black tar paper. Inside, the heat had nowhere to go. It hung in the rafters, thick and suffocating, smelling of fresh pine lumber and the sharp, chemical scent of mothballs rising from the stacks of wool blankets. Elsa threw her kit bag onto a canvas cot. The bed was a simple affair. Wooden frame, stretched canvas, no mattress. It was Spartan, but clean. Suspiciously clean. "It's a trick," Greta whispered, appearing at Elsa's elbow. Her eyes were darting around the room, where 40 women were nervously claiming beds, their movements hushed as if they were in a cathedral. "Greta, stop it," Elsa said, smoothing the rough olive-drab blanket. The letters U.S. were woven into the center in black wool. "It is a bed. Sleep." "I heard them," Greta hissed, clutching her own blanket to her chest like a shield. "While we were in line, 2 guards, one made a gesture, like this." She ran her hands down her own flanks, mimicking a search. "And he said strip. I know that word. Elsa, strip." Elsa stiffened. She looked toward the door. Through the wire mesh of the screen, she could see the silhouette of a guard patrolling the perimeter. He wasn't looking at the fence. He was looking in. The dying sun cast his shadow long across the floorboards, stretching all the way to Elsa's boots. "They are waiting for dark," Greta whimpered. "That's why they haven't fed us yet. They want us weak." Elsa wanted to shake the girl, to tell her that the Geneva Convention forbade such things, that the Americans were obsessed with rules. But the doubt was a splinter in her mind. Why had the processing been so fast? Why were they isolated from the men? She looked at the guard again. He stopped, lit a cigarette, and the brief flare of the match illuminated his face. He wasn't smiling. He was just watching. Waiting. "We sleep in shifts," Elsa announced to the room, her voice cutting through the murmurs. 2 hours on, 2 hours off. Uniforms stay on. Boots stay laced. She sat on the edge of the cot, the canvas groaning under her weight. Her throat was parched, dry as the dust outside. The fear tasted like copper. "If they come," Elsa said, touching the small, hidden pocket inside her tunic where she kept a sharpened piece of metal she'd found on the train, "we do not make it easy." Thirst was a sharper pain than fear. By 2100 hours, the heat inside the barracks had not broken, and the water buckets were empty. Elsa unlatched the screen door, her movements deliberate. Outside, the Texas. Night was vast and heavy, the sky a bruised purple. She walked toward the Lister bag hanging from a wooden tripod near the fence, a heavy canvas sack sweating with condensation. As she filled a metal pitcher from one of the small black taps, boots crunched on the gravel behind her. Elsa froze. The water overflowed, splashing cool and shocking onto her dusty boots. She turned slowly. It was a corporal. He was impossibly young, with ears that stuck out and a face covered in freckles. He didn't have his rifle. He was leaning against a post, watching her. "Thirsty night, huh?" he said. The words were alien, but the tone was soft. He reached into his shirt pocket. Elsa flinched, bracing for a weapon. Instead, he pulled out a small, foil-wrapped rectangle. The silver paper glinted under the perimeter floodlights. He peeled back the corner, revealing dark, slightly melted chocolate. The smell hit Elsa like a physical blow. Rich, sweet cocoa. It was a scent she hadn't encountered in 3 years. Her mouth watered instantly, a traitorous physiological response that made her stomach cramp. "Go on," the corporal said, extending his hand. "My mom sends them. I got too many." The bribe. The propaganda posters in Berlin flashed in her mind. The Amis come with gum and chocolate to buy your soul. It was the first step. First the candy, then the favor, then the violation. He wasn't being kind. He was negotiating. Elsa's hand trembled. She wanted it. God, she wanted it so much, and that desire made her hate him. She slapped his hand. The bar flew out of his grip, landing in the dust. "I am not for sale," she said in broken English, her voice shaking with rage and humiliation. "Keep your filth." The corporal blinked. He looked at the chocolate in the dirt, then back at her. There was no anger in his eyes, no reach for a baton, just a confused, pitying frown. "Suit yourself, lady," he muttered, shaking his head. He turned and walked away, kicking a stone. Elsa stood alone by the Lister bag, her chest heaving. She looked down at the chocolate, now coated in gray dust. He hadn't hit her. He hadn't forced her. He had just walked away. The water pitcher was heavy in her hand, but her confusion was heavier. A monster would have struck her. What was he? Dawn broke like a fever, the sun turning the Texas sky a violent shade of orange. A whistle shrieked, cutting through the fitful sleep of the barracks. "Raus! Everybody out! Schnell!" Elsa rolled off her cot, her uniform wrinkled and stiff with sweat. The women stumbled out into the dusty yard, blinking in the harsh light. Waiting for them was a convoy of 3 trucks, GMC, CQD, Deuce, and a Halfs, idling with a guttural roar. Their canvas covers were drawn tight, dark maws waiting to swallow passengers. But it was the men standing next to the trucks that made Elsa's blood run cold. They weren't the casual guards from yesterday. These men wore respirators hanging around their necks and carried heavy metal canisters with hand pumps. Gas. The word ripped through the ranks of women like an electric shock. Greta grabbed Elsa's hand, her fingernails digging deep into the skin. "It is time," Greta sobbed. "They are going to gas us." "Quiet," Elsa hissed, though her own knees felt like water. Those are for lice. Delousing powder." She said it, but she didn't believe it. The canisters looked too industrial, too efficient. A jeep pulled up, kicking up a cloud of red dust. A major stepped out. Major Miller, the camp commander. He was an older man, his face lined and unreadable behind aviator sunglasses. He spoke to the sergeant, gesturing toward the women, then toward a large, corrugated tin building at the far end of the compound. The sergeant turned to the women. "Officers front, enlisted back." Elsa stepped forward, expecting to be separated, perhaps interrogated while the others were taken away. "No," the sergeant corrected himself, looking at a clipboard. "Change of orders, all together, no exceptions. Everyone goes to the sanitation block." All together. The phrase rang with the finality of a death sentence. In the logic of the Third Reich, you kept officers separate unless you were disposing of everyone. "Into the trucks," the sergeant barked. Elsa climbed into the back of the first truck. The darkness inside smelled of diesel and fear. As the engine revved and the truck lurched forward, she looked at the women huddled around her. They were silent, their eyes wide and hollow. The truck drove for less than 2 minutes. It stopped in front of the tin building. The fans were humming loud. a mechanical drone that drowned out the morning birds. Elsa stepped down. The sign above the door read, Processing Center. She took a breath of the hot, dusty air. It might be her last. We are back at the beginning. Inside the corrugated tin shed, the industrial fans hummed, a low, drowning drone that vibrated in Elsa's chest. The air was stagnant. 40 women stood huddled, their eyes fixed on the sergeant. "All right, listen up," the sergeant barked, just as he had in her nightmares. He gestured to his chest, then to them, making the stripping motion. Greta began to weep, a high, thin sound. Elsa gripped her hand, her knuckles white. She looked at the GIs behind the tables. They were setting out bars of white soap and towels. Towels! "One by one," the sergeant shouted. "Behind the screens. Leave your uniforms in the bags. You will be sprayed, then you shower." He pointed not to a wall, but to a maze of heavy green canvas tarps suspended from the rafters. They formed individual stalls. Privacy? Elsa blinked. The logic didn't fit. If this was a violation, why the screens? "Go," Elsa commanded, her voice hollow. She pushed Greta forward. "I will go last." One by one, the women disappeared behind the canvas. Elsa heard the hiss of water. Hot water. Then came the gasps. Not screams of pain, but gasps of shock. When it was Elsa's turn, she stepped behind the heavy canvas flap. A female American nurse was waiting there, holding a canister of DDT powder. She dusted Elsa quickly, efficiently, without a word. "Shower's that way, honey," the nurse said, pointing to a stall. Elsa stripped off her filthy uniform, the wool scratching her skin for the last time. She stepped under the water. It was hot, gloriously, impossibly hot. She scrubbed the coal dust and the fear from her skin with a bar of ivory soap that smelled of clean laundry. She stepped out, wrapping a thick white towel around herself. She expected to be handed prison fatigues, ragged denim marked with PW. Instead, on a bench outside the stall, sat a pile of neatly folded clothes. Elsa froze. She picked up the top garment. It wasn't a uniform. It was a dress. A civilian dress made of light, printed rayon. It was blue with a pattern of small white daisies. Beside it was a pair of stockings and leather shoes, and a tag, still attached, Sears, Roebuck & Co. She held the dress up. It was something a housewife would wear to the market, something a human being would wear. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. They hadn't stripped her to humiliate her. They had stripped her to burn the war off her back. They had bought her a dress from a catalog because they didn't want to put a woman in men's clothes. Elsa buried her face in the floral rayon, smelling the starch and the newness. And for the first time since leaving Berlin, she wept. Not from fear, but from the shattering of her entire world. The monsters were gentlemen. The mess hall was bright, smelling of coffee and bacon, a scent so rich it felt almost illicit. Elsa walked in, the hem of her blue floral dress swishing against her calves. It felt strange to walk without the weight of heavy wool and leather boots. She felt lighter, vulnerable, yet oddly free. Around her, her unit had transformed. They were no longer a gray, faceless mass of the Wehrmacht. They were a room full of women in bright yellows, reds, and greens, looking at each other with shy, disbelief-filled smiles. She took a stainless steel tray and slid it along the metal rails. A cook, a large man with a white apron stained with grease, plopped a ladle of scrambled eggs onto her tray. Real eggs, yellow and fluffy. Next came a scoop of potatoes. Then 2 slices of bread. It was white, pure snowy white. Elsa stared at it. In Germany, bread was dark, heavy, and lately, extended with sawdust. This looked like cake. "Butter's on the table, ma'am," the cook said, wiping his hands. Elsa carried her tray to a table where Greta was already sitting. Greta was wearing a pink dress that was slightly too big, but she was smiling, a real smile that reached her eyes. "Elsa, look," Greta whispered, holding up a metal pitcher. "Milk? Fresh milk?" Elsa sat down. She picked up a slice of the white bread. It was soft, squishing between her fingers. She spread a thick layer of yellow butter on it. Butter that wasn't rationed, wasn't mixed with margarine. She took a bite. It was sweet. It dissolved in her mouth, rich and fatty and comforting. It tasted of peace. It tasted of a country that hadn't been hollowed out by war. She looked out the window. The young corporal from the night before, the one with the chocolate, was walking the perimeter. He wasn't a monster. He wasn't a gangster. He was just a boy from Texas who had too much chocolate and wanted to share it. The anger that had sustained Elsa for years, the hatred that Goebbels had planted in her heart, finally evaporated. It couldn't survive in the face of this overwhelming, mundane decency. "They did not beat us with hate," Elsa said quietly, wiping a crumb of white bread from her lip. "What did you say?" Greta asked. Elsa looked around the hall at the women eating, laughing, alive. "I said," Elsa replied, picking up her coffee, "they beat us with bread." She took a sip. It was sweet and hot and real. The war was over, and she had survived.